Hello, my name is Mukesh Prasad, and I hope you have seen my other video already, which described the problem with immigration versus asylum and how it's likely to be connected to global warming, because there is evidence that the leader of Venezuela significantly cut down the country's import revenues to fight global warming. So it becomes important to know if global warming is wrong science. And my position is that it needs to be debated openly. Alright, so I discussed some of the science in the other video, but what about the massive, humongous evidence? I mean, every day there is a piece of evidence that you could find coming out in the news. Apparently, New York Times wrote 800 articles on global warming in 1 year. So every day you could find two alarming articles that provide evidence. All right, so the evidence is mostly fraud. All right, and now that's a very serious allegation because there are these very important government agencies, and I'm saying they're committing fraud, so I have to back this up. So let me back this up. So let's start with something called melting glaciers. Now this is iconic to many people. They have seen videos of these huge ice chunks falling off, and they're like, how does that not prove global warming? Okay, so what you see is true. Those ice chunks are falling off. What you're being told about it is false. And that's how you're being tricked when you see those videos of the melting glaciers. Now, a glacier is literally a river of ice. It flows. It has a beginning and an end, like all rivers. It ends in the ocean. What happens when it reaches the end? It melts. If it didn't do that, it would not be a glacier. So all glaciers melt. There's nothing unusual about it. If they did not melt, they would not be glaciers. So if you point this out to the climate alarmists, they would say, oh, but 3,000 glaciers are shrinking and only 2,000 are growing, that proves it. But that's not what they are telling you when they're showing you videos of melting glaciers. They want you to believe that those melting glaciers are evidence of climate change. If they were honest, they would have said, look, here is this really cool videos of melting glaciers. It's got nothing to do with man-made or any other climate change. That's what they do. However, we have other evidence that points to man-made climate change. But they let you think that the melting glaciers are evidence. So that's why the melting glaciers are fraudulent. Now there is rising seas. Everybody knows the seas are rising and it's going to cause catastrophe. So there are these islands, Tuvalu and Kiribati. These were the poster child islands of man-made climate change. They're going to go under. People can fly there, talk to the inhabitants. These people were scared out of their wits by alarmists, and they were told their islands are going to go under. And this was supposed to happen like in a decade or so long before now. What's happened actually is these islands have grown. So if the scientists were honest, you would have seen this in your newspaper, in your science article, saying these islands have grown. Of course, they turn around and explain why they have grown because of man-made climate change. But the point is, this was important information. They should have been upfront with it, but they hide it. And that's how all the evidence does. All the evidence is done by hiding some information, twisting some information, not telling you what you're looking at. Right here in Colorado, around 2010-12, ski areas were being told to fear global warming because there would be no more snow in a few years. And they would all go out of business. And therefore they should pay money to global warming scientists. A few years later, no problems. Snow is, if anything, even more than before. To climate scientists, that's not an issue. They turn around and say, oh, more snow? Of course, that's because of man-made climate change. So this is basically heads I win, tails I win science. No matter what happens, they can explain it away after the fact. And when their predictions fail to come true, they just don't mention it. So what about all these breaking records, all this information, hottest year ever, hottest month ever? So all these come from NASA and NOAA, which is also an organization of NASA. So basically, these are organizations that are under NASA, and they are very heavily involved in manipulating the data to make it seem as if the world is warming. So there is a consistent pattern here. Some data comes in which shows that no global warming is happening, no man-made climate change is happening. A month later, a year later, sometimes as long as 17 years later, NASA scientists find a way to revise the data. After revision, it always says, yes, global warming, man-made climate change is happening. So, it's not a bad thing to revise the data. We are supposed to revise the data in science if we find out the earlier data was wrong, or if we find out our model needs to be changed. But usually the way it works is it goes both ways. Sometimes the data would be revised in favor of global warming, sometimes against. It's just random. Mistakes aren't made in a pattern usually. Sometimes this mistake is made, sometimes that mistake is made. So it's like a coin toss. Sometimes it will work one way, sometimes it works the other way. With NASA data, every single time it works in favor of global warming. So that's like they're tossing a coin and they're getting a head every time. So after some point, that becomes outside the realm of probability pretty much. We can do mathematical analysis and say, here is this confidence interval, which I'm estimating would be way upward of 90%. And we can say with 90% or much higher confidence that NASA is committing fraud here. So that's a mathematical evidence of fraud. So there is all this stuff happening. All the news you're being told, they don't tell you that the bad scenario are based on computer models. Now, computer models are things that can tell you whatever you want them to say. If you type 2 + 2, a computer will say 4. But any programmer can write a program where if you type 2 + 2, it'll give you 5. So the models show global warming because they've been programmed to do so. And in the news articles, nobody tells you that. So again, they are defrauding you there. They should explain that there is no scientific evidence as such. This is what their guess is, that their computer model is saying this. So when they're not saying this, they're again defrauding you. When they're not telling you that the predictions failed to pass, they're defrauding you. So all of it is just a massive fraud. And the reason for this is that when James Hansen raised the alarm for global warming, which at that time was an honest thing to do, Congress allocated billions of dollars. So scientists compete with each other for this money. And therefore, they all just say global warming is true. And for instance, I saw an article from a nuclear fusion person, which seemed to be saying global warming was true, but after I read it, all it was really saying was, guys, nuclear fusion might help with the greenhouse gases. Can we have some of that fine greenhouse gas money, please? So the impression it was giving that this nuclear fusion scientist agrees with global warming, but that wasn't true. He was not even qualified. He didn't know anything about it. He just wanted the money because they're billions of dollars. Then they're biologists, species are dying, species are adapting, species are changing, all because of global warming. Now, if you're a biologist, you have to know that this is ridiculous because the predicted level is like 2 degrees in a century, so that's 0.02 degrees in a year, 0.2 degrees in a decade. So organisms on Earth have evolved And 0.2 degrees of change is not going to impact any of them. I mean, it's hard to imagine that a biologist doesn't understand this, that 0.2 degree of temperature change cannot impact organisms on Earth. Yet you have thousands and thousands and thousands of species which are all getting destroyed or something is happening. So it's all because of the money. There is no evidence. The whole massive scientific evidence, it's false, fraudulent, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes the fraud is intentional, sometimes they just assume that everybody else is telling the truth, so they go along with it. So that's the true story of the evidence. There isn't any. The Earth is not warming according to most real data, and in fact, there is evidence to believe that right now we just happen to be in a cooling cycle. And the fraud is dangerous because it'll stop us from preparing for that cooling cycle if that fact is true. So it's important for people to ask this debate be done publicly. Thank you for listening. Please share these videos. These are important to the future. If you believe in global warming, you should fight to make this debate open. Prove me wrong openly, not behind the scenes, not in whisper campaigns. Thank you very much.